identity after I read this novel, Ship of Theseus, by V.M. Straka. In this novel, he completely explores identity by deleting the main character's identity in itself. The main character, S, goes into a world where he doesn't know who he is, and no one really seems to know who he is either. When we look at the title of the book, Ship of Theseus, the book is in itself exploring this idea of identity. The Ship of Theseus paradox is the paradox in which we take a ship and slowly we replace each panel. If we have the original ship and we just replace one panel, we would still say that we have the same ship. So if we continue to go on and on, slowly replacing one panel at a time, you're going to say each time that you have the same ship. This whole paradox is exploring how when we change things about ourselves, our identity seems to stay the same. So when I learned this, I started looking at identity in different ways and thinking about how, in a sense, our identity is kind of fake. That nothing in itself will define our identity, so then what's the point of my identity at all? However, the novel looks at this and then goes in a little different way later on, when it states that a shooter is not just a man with a gun, but a man who chooses to pull its trigger. In this sense, identity is based upon your actions. That you're not just who you are, but you are what you do. So with this, I wanted to design a survey to look at how we view ourselves and how others view ourselves. Others just see our actions, so that's how they view our identity. We, however, have an inner view of our own identity. So the way I designed this survey is I first asked survey takers to state their relationship with another person who is going to be taking the survey later on. I then went on to have them answer 4 questions about their values and their virtues. The first question pertained to cheating on a significant other. They had a friend who was being cheated on, how would they respond? The second one had to do with assault and their response. The third one was about going into a test completely unprepared and how you would approach that. And then the fourth one was finding a wallet on the street with a lot of money. After I had my test takers take the test answering those questions, I then had them give the test to the person whose relationship they described earlier. At this point, I wanted the other person to answer the same exact questions from before, but in the original person's shoes. So in this sense, they were taking the test for the first person so we could see how they viewed the first person's identity. What I got from this was that our identity is very strange. When we took the test and we had people take the test, sometimes there were arguments. Sometimes people would answer one way, their friend would answer another way, and then get into an argument afterwards about who was really right, how would this person really approach this topic. There seems to be a huge difference between what others think we're going to do and what we think we're going to do. And the evidence backed this up. Only 63% of the time did the 2 quiz takers match on how they thought a person would, or the person would approach this issue. 22% of the time, the friend thought that the original person was more virtuous than the original person did, and 15% of the time, the friend thought the original person was less virtuous than the original person would. So then I wanted to look into kind of how we are and how our self is in modern philosophy. So currently there's 2 ideas. There's the idea of an ideal self and the idea of a real self. The ideal self essentially is your goals. So who you think you should be based upon your values, what you've been taught growing up, and things you've learned along the way. Then the real self, there's 2 different versions of the real self. Some people think that the real self is your self-image. How you view yourself is going to be your real self. While others think that your real self is who you really are. And the only way to see that is by others' view of you. And so essentially based upon your actions. But I don't think that in a way either of those are really true. From my results, sometimes I think that we think we're closer to our ideal self than we really are. And sometimes I think that other people don't truly understand who we are. Because there's this thing about actions that it's only one-sided. People see what I do, but they don't understand why I do it. So they can't really understand my identity the way I can. But sometimes I get confused too, and I convince myself that I'm closer to my ideal self than I really am. So ultimately, I think we get back to this idea from the book of Ship of Theseus that identity essentially makes no sense. We can't define our identity, other people can't define our identity, and our actions can't even really define our identity. So identity is kind of just a hoax in itself. So then I went into looking up how does it matter how we perceive ourselves versus how others perceive ourselves. This was the ultimate goal, to compare these two things. And when you Google this stuff, a lot of things that come up pertain to business. It's really important in business to be aware of what we think of ourselves, to then recognize what other people think of us, but to not worry about that, because that's going to hurt who we are. Because in a sense, if someone tells me that I'm a bad public speaker, that's going to hurt me, and I shouldn't worry about that. But the thing is that they may be right, that they may have a better understanding of me than I do, and I don't really know. So I think what I've come away with is that we should really just work on being the best person that we can try to be, being as close to our ideal selves as possible, and then from there, trying to make our actions replicate this ideal self. Okay. And then the one thing that I really see being concrete in having to do with identity is the physical self. Our identity, personality seems strange, it doesn't make sense, we don't understand it, other people don't understand it, but I am, and I look how I look. So if you tell me how I look, I should agree. But we've seen that this isn't really true. And I'd like to show a video explaining that.
I'm a forensic artist, worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
I kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm gonna ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm gonna ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. It couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think...
So ultimately, what we come away with is that we perceive our personality incorrectly. Other people perceive our personality incorrectly. But we also perceive our physical self incorrectly. And other people also, in a sense, perceive our physical self incorrectly. So what does it matter? What does our identity matter? What does other people's perception of our identity matter? If everyone's wrong, it shouldn't matter, right? But that's just not true. If my real self, who I really am, is a really good person, but everyone else thinks I'm a terrible person, that's going to be important in real life because no one's going to like me. No one's going to want to work with me. So what's important isn't just who my real self is, but also how other people perceive me. So I need to be as close as I can be to my ideal self and then have my actions replicate that ideal self. One of the other things that I know is that people that we just met don't understand us or our values as well as people we know well. So this is going to be pretty important because even if our real self is a good person, people we just met don't necessarily know that. And this is backed up through my research. I found that people who identify their relationship to be a 5 or less got 53% of the answers wrong, while people who identified their relationship to be a 6 or more only got 31% of the answers wrong. So statistically, with a 90% confidence interval, I can say that there's a difference between people who know us and people who don't know us. And this should be obvious. We all know that. The people that we know really well really know us really well as well. But this is actually really important because if I go into a job interview with someone I've obviously just met, they're not going to understand me very well. If they misinterpret nearly half of me incorrectly, they're going to be hiring someone that they don't really know. So when people tell you going into a job interview, be yourself, they'll see that and they'll love you. That's not really true. They'll probably know some of you, and they'll probably know some of someone else that they don't really know at all. So when you go into a job interview, you need to, in a sense, probably put a front of it. You need to present the best you. You don't need to just present you because they're not going to know who you really are. Thank you for your time.